My name is Leah Reid. I'm a composer of acoustic and electronic music, and I am calling in from Massachusetts. The piece was really about experimenting with the timbre of noise. And so taking and filtering it to various degrees as the water droplets were hitting various surfaces, whether it was pavement or the roof of a car or dropping into a bucket. Various different timbres and colors would emerge from these different water droplets. And so I did quite a few different analyses going from these pitch types of components that the droplets were making through more of a full spectrum of noise, and use that material in the piece. My main process in general is taking inspiration from the sounds that surround us in our everyday lives. So whether it's, the bird chirping outside one's window, or the blender that you have in your kitchen, or just the timings of sounds as they're interacting with each other. For me, I find that really inspirational, and I listen all the time to these sounds and find a lot of musical inspiration from that. And I'm constantly recording. It's the inspiration for most of my pieces is these different found sounds. My primary compositional process really centers around timbre and the exploration of that. So similar with Cloudburst, which is really about the exploration of timbre and noise. Most of my pieces can be deduced back to that. When I was a doctoral student at Stanford University, I created a compositional timbre model based off of perceptual timbre studies that I use when composing. And so just like with Cloudburst, that's the process, is thinking about the 6 parameters that comprise that particular model and using that to structure my pieces. I also tend to use a little bit of math involved, including with Cloudburst, of giving myself formal markers to work in between. In Cloudburst in particular, I worked with a model and set up these different structural markers, a sort of a decelerating gesture that had many different accelerating patterns in it, and then another gesture at the end. So you have sort of this like crescendo and decrescendo type shape, but all mathematically derived. So each droplet is actually placed at a very precise mathematical timing. And the timbral components of my timbre model were fit into that. So it's with Cloudburst, it's a fairly simple structure of sort of simple moving to more complexity and then back and filtering it back out. But with some of my pieces, it's much more involved and complex in terms of the trajectories and the explorations of timbre. The timbre model is essentially 6 parameters that is inspired by spectral and post-spectral compositional practices, Schaefferian concepts, and perceptual timbre models. And it combines these ways of thinking and elaborates on them. So the 6 different parameters are spectral flux, spectral centroid, noise to pitch ratio, dynamics, attack quality, and the length of the event. Needless to say, there's various pitch components, there's various temporal components, and how these elements are combining together, which works similarly with how we're perceiving timbre. It's led me to explore timbre from just a variety of different angles. So each piece I write, I'm trying to expand upon my understanding of timbre and to write pieces that explore it more fully. So sometimes that's working, with string instruments or noise elements. Sometimes it's working with the voice, or with space as a parameter, or really anything. Each time I write a piece, it's a different theme, a different angle, a different viewpoint of trying to explore this and expand upon and push myself as a composer. With Cloudburst, it really was about continuing my understanding of timbre and noise. The fixed media is all different water droplets and rain sounds and water sounds, and thrown in with some environmental sounds like cars passing and birds chirping, and it tells a story of this cloudburst, of this really intense rainfall. But there's also the instrumental side of things, and where the performers have a lot of freedom. And even though the score is quite notated, there's a lot of improvisation that's happening with that. The combination of working with the performers and giving both that flexibility, but also having the static, rigid nature of the initial plan was something that I was focusing on with the work. And I definitely learned a lot from working with the original ensemble, which was the Neve Trio, who I wrote the piece for. And then since I've worked on the piece with quite a few different ensembles, and it's been a wonderful learning experience seeing how each ensemble interprets the work, and they have the flexibility and freedom to explore the rich rain sounds and noisy elements that their instruments can make. It's funny because the mathematical part was really just because I like, looking at it felt organic. That type of accelerating and exponential type of curves, which is basically what it's based off of. It feels really just what you would experience, and it feels more natural than if I were to do something naturally. And then combined with the performers having then their the timings, it's never exactly as much as one strives for absolute perfect timing and whatnot. There's always variation, and that's what's so beautiful about it. I began composing as a kid. I went to composer camp. I don't know if so the Walden School is this phenomenal program based. They have now it's a young musicians program. It's based in Dublin, New Hampshire, and I went there as a child and composed my first pieces, and got hooked and went to performing arts high school, and then for my undergrad and master's and doctorate and so on, and never stopped. I've always experimented. I think the constant relationship has been my interest in found sounds and the sounds that surround us in our everyday lives. But I think my voice has changed. I'm trained to compose. Was trained to compose in any style, whether it's with classical romantic styles through different avant-garde techniques and whatnot. And so my style has changed a lot over the years as I've explored different styles and techniques. Really, it was when I, thought about found sounds and how that was really my inspiration that I found my own voice and was able to link it to timbre, even though I'm still exploring all of the different thematic styles. It really grounded my process when I found that. And a lot of that had to do with exploring technology and all the freedom that has to offer. When I was a student and first was exposed to different technological tools, it opened my mind into the possibilities, and I was able to compose not only acoustic works more freely, but experiment with electronics too. And that was a huge bloom in my process. It really just enabled me to not be limited by the bar lines on the page. It allowed me to just think more creatively and see things and think about them, from more of a visual perspective, which is sort of, my parents are both visual artists, and I was deeply inspired by their artwork and the works that they were creating and how they were seeing the world. My mom's a plein air pastel painter, so she's painting out in the world, and paints always on spot. I think about things a lot visually, and so by working with technology, it helped me sort of free me up from the confines of just how I was notating things and sort of approach it from a sound and perception perspective first, as opposed to the visual, like what the performer is seeing first. It helped then me create then clear notation when the time came to I really try to think about how the audience is perceiving the different works as the starting point, and then move backwards in terms of then how can another human recreate this piece, and how to put it on paper so it's the clearest thing and not just the most complicated looking thing. I mean, again, it comes down to with my my deep interest in timbre. And so perception is key. So what is the audience experiencing at the end of the day? How are they hearing this different process unfold? I mean, they may not understand exactly that is what they're hearing. They might put it into different terms, but if they're given an outline of what's happening, I hope that they can recognize it and understand that. And they might use different terms to describe it. Sometimes with an audience, it's a storyline perhaps that they're hearing, and so they might be feeling certain tension and releases in a different way that they're that I'd use more technical terms maybe, but they might be hearing more or pitch related materials, more gritty sections, and then moments of release. But in the end, it's all coming back to this perceptual guide of how we're feeling time unfolding, how we're feeling, these tensions and releases, how we're, feeling all the different, excitement and, and slowing downs of materials. So it always comes back to that for me. I think it's really fun to experiment with, and I love having my students experiment with it too. It's how do you control time? It's such a it's a fun question to ask, and definitely a neat one to experiment with as a composer. And how do you control that feeling? Does time feel like it's happening quickly or slowly? And how do you control that? Oh, immensely. I mean, my students challenge me to think differently. They ask questions about things that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of, or concepts that I think I knew like the back of my hand. When you have to explain them to someone that doesn't necessarily know it, you realize, maybe I do need to think about that a little more. I need a better way of doing that. I need to be able to figure out that coding right away, or it's challenged me to be a better composer, a better artist, a better musician, and to understand and it's not just contemporary music, it's all styles of music. My students are just as interested in composing hip hop or pop music as they are in as contemporary avant-garde compositions. And I think that's very exciting. I like being challenged, and learning how to work in those different styles is fun. And I think it's helped my music being able to figure out those different styles of music too, how to create the perfect drop, or
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, sure, why not? It's all fun. Well, I've been deeply inspired by the spectral and post-spectral schools. My first absolute love of composers was Kaya Sariaho, and I just adored pretty much everything that she created. I just couldn't wait to get my hands on and study those scores religiously. And Ligeti, Xenakis, Crumb, some deep favorites. Same thing with acousmatic composers, or like Hildegard Westerkamp and Pierre Schaeffer, and some of the beginnings through through what's happening now was very inspirational. I also like to listen to a lot of pop music and other just bands around the house, and it all goes into my music. I like, I'm a big opera fan. I grew up singing opera, and have a huge love for that still. So when I'm thinking about the pieces, I think I want a mixture of this particular style from this mixed with this and mashed together. And I don't think anyone could ever figure that out. But before I could come up with the musical terms, that's how I would think about everything as a young composer. And I still think about that to some extent now. And I think that, one's influences, for me, all of them go into my music, and it's diverse, whether it's from science, whether it's from the music that's surrounding me, or the sounds that are surrounding me in my everyday life, or the blender that's living downstairs, and the particular sounds of that. It all goes into my music, and suddenly I'll be like, that is what I want to spend more time listening to. I want to spend more time thinking about these few concepts, and it makes it into my music. I've always loved the voice and just adored opera, and the voice and the human element in general. I was involved with the Rail and More Opera Company, which is a fantastic opera company in New Hampshire as a child, and was cast in my first production was the magic flute,
Okay.
and was cast as one of the, they sometimes they use children in the different roles, and so that was my first role, and it was in quite a few different productions after that, and that was my instrument throughout high school and undergrad and grad school. I actually avoided doing a lot of composition for voice for a long time, because for me the elements felt actually quite separate. I would view opera as this one particular compositional style, and then what I was interested in composing as something different. And it took until a few years after I graduated from Stanford with my doctorate to really fully combine the loves, and figure out how to compose for the voice, and think about that relationship between timbre and the voice. And what was so complicated about it for me was that you not only have the beautiful instrument of the voice, you have text, which has its own timbral components, and then also theatrical inflections, which is another deep layer. So you have these three simultaneous things that in performance come together. But from a compositional perspective, you can think about them independently. So formally, it was a lot more to process. And so my first scores of working with that were quite intense. I ended up coming back to the same idea of technology and how to simplify the process. And so I started composing a lot of those pieces as fixed media works first, and performing all the different parts, and then transcribing everything at the end. So I have a whole series of works, Apple, Singlefish, Cranberries, which are taking works by Gertrude Stein. And so her poems from her Tender Button series, and experimenting with the sounds, textures, and timbres that are present inside that text, and emotional inflections. Learning all of that, it's helped me a lot with my other pieces too, with thinking about that relationship between visuals and so what you're seeing the performer doing, and then what you're hearing as well. And so that's a relationship that I think about a lot, and I think that comes from the my interest in opera to some degree, is sort of blending all that. There's this visual component which is so strong in opera. There's the staging, all of the gestures, all of that, and it's all been something that has gone into my work and influenced it a lot. I also have the performers oftentimes speak or do things. Sometimes they love that, and sometimes we find workarounds. I am currently composing a piece for percussion, video, and electronics. So it is based off of the relationship between visual and sonic gestures. So I've been doing a series of collaborations with my mother, Reid, who is a visual artist. And so we are creating a piece for the concert hall next, that I took a recording of her painting just a sketch of some flowers over the course of a day, and then created a video out of it that visually works the same way that my compositions do. So, it's structured the same, using the same process, layered, and works with color and visuals in the same way that I think about sonic material. And so I'm putting it together, and we will be premiering that work hopefully in the fall, if I can get it done in time. And then I have a other series of percussion pieces that I'm working on after that, percussion quartet and percussion and electronics piece. Please check out my website, leahreid.com, and my SoundCloud page.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this interview and want to see more like it, check out the 30 by 30 by 30 playlist on our channel. For more information about the 30 by 30 by 30 project, check out the website linked to the right.